Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hello and welcome. Today we are going to go over the smooth brush for sculpting inside of Cinema 4D. At this point, we've gone over a couple of the brushes for sculpting, and you may notice that they start to have very similar settings, that the brushes work in similar ways. There's slight differences between them, but you can carry over knowledge from one brush to another. And with that said, rather than making this too repetitious for all of you, initially at the beginning of this video, I'm just going to go over the settings that have not been covered yet and the differences for the brush. And then after that, I'll go through the rest of the settings for those who are new to sculpting inside of Cinema 4D. And this is the first video that they've seen and they don't have knowledge from the last videos that I've created on the brushes. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. I have some bumpy textures on these cubes and we are going to smooth them out using the smooth brush. Now, as you know, the sculpting tab over here will change the mode from our typical standard that we open within to having all of our sculpting tools available. So I'll click on here and you'll see our cubes are here. We can switch from our sculpting layers. We're going to get into this concept a little bit more in the future and go into our objects tab here. I had created these textures using a displacer, so you can see that's adding that bumpy texture there. And hit current state to object. So I right clicked on that and now I'm going to hit current state to object and we'll have these copies and I can delete the originals over here with the displacers. So now we're just left with the geometry baked down. So it's very similar to the make editable. It's just taking that deformation from the displacer, which you can find in here, and baking these down so that now we can adjust their polygons, points, and edges using the sculpting brushes, because the sculpting brushes only work with objects that are fully editable. So let's go ahead and start over here with this first one. You can see that now, since these are all editable meshes, we have our brushes that are no longer grayed out and we can actually click on them. And you can see our smooth brush is actually all the way down here. So you can find it here. To activate it, you can also find it within the mesh menu under brushes. You'll see all of your brushes are listed here as well. So you can find it in either one of those locations. And the cool thing about the smooth brush is that if you work with any other brush, like we went over the draw brush yesterday, and we talked about how that works. I'm going to up the strength. But you can actually activate the smooth brush from the other brushes just by holding down Shift, and then you can see that this surface here is being smoothed out. So that's the first very important thing to realize with this, is that you can activate it actually from the other brushes using the Shift hotkey. And the other cool thing about this is that it really helps clean up your geometry quite a bit. Like you can see we have some weird intersections here, and the smooth brush is a great way to troubleshoot things like that. So I've clicked on my smooth brush here and we're just going to go like this. Now we don't have any weird intersecting geometry along those edges that were actually created by that displacer. So if you ever have some overlapping geometry and you have some errors, and this can be an issue especially when you're 3D printing or rendering, this'll help clean that up and remove those geometry errors along the edges or where there's intersections. A smooth brush is very helpful. And you'll notice that it has a lot of the same settings as other brushes, like the size and the strength. There's this new one down here, Flood. Now we haven't gone over Flood yet, but what you can do is you can click on it, and whichever is your object that's selected, like this cube, if we hit Flood, it will apply the smoothing effect to the entire mesh. So I'll go ahead and click that. And you can see that it is smoothing out the entire mesh. And actually those edges are being cleaned up a little bit as well. Now, if you wanted to keep that bumpy mesh on the interior and just adjust those edges, I'll hit undo a few times. You can of course go through this manually, but that flood setting is new to the smoothing brush. We haven't covered it yet for the other brushes, so I wanted to point that out to you first. Now let's take a look at some of the other options here. You'll see that all the basic settings are the same as for the grab brush and the draw brush that we've covered. There's nothing new here. I will cover that in a moment for everyone who's new. These settings are the same as what we've covered already for the other brushes, except for the flood. We've gone over all the stamp settings. There's nothing different really here from what we've already covered. Same goes for the stencil. The modifiers are unique usually to depending on what the tool is. So for those of you who are new, modifiers actually use another tool. It uses another brush with the other brush. It's almost like drawing with two brushes at once. So we have the draw brush that we've gone over before. We haven't covered the pinch brush or the inflate brush. We're going to do that in the future. But if you enable one of these, for example, the draw brush, when you are drawing on this with your mouse, it will be applying the draw brush and the smooth brush at the same time. So it will be smoothing and drawing at the same time. You can adjust the draw brush strength here with the slider. So I'll just draw on here. You can see that we have this here. So that is both smoothing and drawing at the same time, which is pretty cool. I'll hit undo. That's how these modifiers work. If I were to enable the pinch by selecting this brush here and checking it on, it will be smoothing and pinching at the same time. So that's the effect happening there. This is pretty low strength. I'm going to up this up to 100% so they can see it a little bit better. We're going to go over the pinch brush more in the future. We can do the same thing with inflate. So I'll turn on inflate. It's inflating and smoothing at the same time. And you can have multiples of these on at the same time if you wish. So those are your modifiers. And now for all of you who are new to sculpting brushes in general, I'm going to go through all the other settings so that you feel like you're an expert when it comes to sculpting. So here we are. The first tab we're going to go through is your settings and your basic tab. Here you'll notice that we have our size slider here. This affects the size of your brush. You can adjust this by moving the slider back and forth. You can also adjust this using the middle mouse button. And you can see that when I click the middle mouse button in the viewport and drag back and forth, we are adjusting our size. Now the next option here is you can use the right and the left bracket keys. And sometimes when I'm sculpting using a Wacom pen or Cintiq, I prefer to use the bracket keys because I don't like using the buttons on the Cintiq pen. But a lot of people like to do that, and you can also work that way as well. we have strength, and that controls how much this is smoothing. So the higher the strength, the more this will be smoothed out. Right now we have it at 100%, so it is really smoothing this out. If I reduce this to something really small, it won't have as strong of an effect, and it'll be a little bit more subtle of an effect on here. I'm going to put this up to 100% again, so that's how that works. Now, these settings also tie into a couple of the settings in the basic tab. So we have link size. What that'll do is keep the same size brush as you switch between your brushes. So if I have a really large brush here for the smooth, but then if I click on the draw brush and I have a small one, you can see that right now they are differing sizes as I switch between brushes. If I want both of these to stay the same as I switch between my brushes, I can click link size, which is also the same as this icon up here. You have two places you can turn it on, and once I do that, if I switch brushes, they're going to be the same size. The next option is link strength, and you can probably guess what that does. The strength that I enter with in here will stay consistent across all brushes as long as I hit link strength, which you can also find up here. Link strength is up here. You can click it on and off there too, and that will keep it consistent as I switch between my brushes. You can see all of them say 100% now because they are linked. Now we have some other ones here. Let's go over keep visual size. This one has always been a little bit buggy for me, but what it does is it keeps your brush the same whether if you zoom in or out relative to the screen. I usually keep this off because it doesn't usually work for me, and I like to see the size of the brush as it is by default. Back face, so there's a front face and a back face to polygons, and they work differently according to that. So if I were to just go ahead and go inside this cube, we are now looking at the back face of the polygons, and the back face of the polygons, if you select them, I'm using my brush selection here, you can see that they're purple, but on the other side they're orange. Now if we drop back inside of this cube, I'm going to actually deselect everything by clicking off in the viewport, and now that I've done that, you can see that the back face, while it's turned off, if I am using the smoothing brush, it's not working if I use the smoothing brush on the back face. It won't smooth it out. Now if I were to turn on the back face, and now I can actually smooth out this mesh from the back side. Whereas you cannot do that unless if you have that back face turned on. You have different preview modes, and that's basically how you preview your brush here. You can see that right now it's set to on surface, so our brush will change angles depending on the angle of the surface it is moving across. You can choose screen. Screen will keep it relative to the screen. As you can see, when I'm moving the brush over the surface now, it's always parallel to the camera, what we're looking through as we're looking at the scene. If we choose off, it will remove that preview of your brush altogether. I'm going to change this back to on surface because I like this one. Now we'll come back to this link stencil once we go through the stencil settings. Here in the settings tab, back here, we have fall off, and you can actually see this curve, this fall off curve, previewed on the brush, which is really handy. So if I were to change this to be completely linear and move that point up on our chart, you can see that now we see that fall off previewed as a linear line on our screen, on our brush. Now, if I were to use this, you can see that it is applying the smoothing effect 100% within the diameter of that circle, which is representing our brush right now. If I wanted to do this a little bit different, I'll reduce that there. You can think of the fall off as controlling the strength along that brush. So if I reduce this lower and reduce this lower, you can see that it's just having less of an effect on this brush because it's not at that 100% strength through and through. So what happens when you have this selected is this is saying the center of the brush will apply the most effect and then it will fade off to the side. So you get this nice blending between the effect and the rest of the mesh. You have different shapes though. You can load another preset like this. You can grab this triangle shape here. Click on that, you'll see that updates on our brush and we can smooth out using that as well. You can add in additional points here by holding Control or Command if you're using a Mac, and click here and move this up and down. So you have a lot of control over these brushes. And you can make new shapes here, like this. And you'll see that preview on our brush as well. And if you don't like the new shape you created and you want it to go back to the default, there's this little reset button right here that you can click on, and then it's back to how it was before. So that's how your fall off works. Now we have steady stroke. Steady stroke is really helpful because it smooths out your lines. Like if you have a little bit of a shaky hand while you are drawing on your screen or using a Cintiq or your mouse, what this does is it'll smooth it out. It'll take the average of where your mouse was and smooth out that line. So if I were to go through here, you can see there's this line appearing, and that's the length in which it is taking the average location of where my brush was and smoothing that out so that you get a smoother line. The longer this line is, the smoother that stroke will be that you are drawing. And this really stands out more if you're using something like the draw brush where you're actually drawing on the surface and you want to have a smooth line, but it's also available for the smooth brush. So I just selected the draw brush here. I feel like this comes into play even more with the other brushes because you can see them a little bit more, but it's also available here for the smooth. We also have the spacing here, so I'll turn off steady stroke and we'll go over to spacing. Spacing is the distance between the circles. So the closer these are together, the more it'll look like a steady smoothing stroke. But if we increase this quite a bit and then we go into here and draw, it will be smoothing out at a distance between those points. And it's kind of hard to see. You might be able to see it more if we use a different brush like the draw brush because you're actually increasing the surface. I need to turn off the steady stroke, turn on the spacing here. So when you draw with the draw brush, it usually comes out like the shape here. But if we increase the percent, and we go in here, you can see that it's only increasing the surface every once in a while between those, and almost looks like little circles. But what I'll do is I'll increase our strength way up so that this is very obvious, something crazy like that. And now I'll draw, and you can see that we are drawing like this now with the spacing, whereas before, with our spacing turned off, it's a whole lot smoother and it's more like this. So that's your spacing and what it does. We have edge detect, And that's the same for both the smoothing brush and the draw brush, very similar once again. So edge detect, I'll turn on, I'll turn off spacing. I'll go over to this cube over here. And what this does, this edge detect, is it'll detect where there's a hard edge, and it'll use the angle of where those polygons are facing and the difference between those angles in order to determine where an edge is. So when I come up to an edge like this, it's stopping at that edge with edge detect on. This angle determines how much that difference needs to be between the polygons up here and the polygons on this side before it stops. If I bring this down to 1, it's not really smoothing because there's more than 1 degree between this polygon facing this way and this polygon. So anywhere where there's more than 1 degree of polygon difference, it's not going to really smooth out. If we move this up to 90, it'll just smooth everything. Like, it doesn't stop at that edge anymore because all of these are pretty much fall within that range that we've chosen with our angle. If you make it a different number of degrees between these, it'll just affect where it's being smoothed and where it's not being smoothed according to those edges. So that's how that works. We have various draw modes. Freehand is the one we've been using so far, where you just move your mesh over the surface and it'll just basically draw. That's kind of what it's like. We have this option line, where you can smooth along a line. So I can click here, create a line, click here, create a line, and then if I double click, it'll end the line and it'll smooth along that path. Now we also have lasso fill, where you can choose an area and fill it in with the smooth by drawing. So I'll just draw a shape here with our lasso, and it'll smooth out that entire area in that shape. You have polyfill, and you can draw a polygon here. I'll draw a polygon here like this, and double click to close it, and you can see that that area is smoothed out. We have rectangle fill, and that will make a rectangular shape, and it'll fill it with the smooth. So now we have this area here where our rectangle was, and it's smoothed out. That's how those tools there work. Now let's go over to our stamp. What does that mean? Let's turn this on, and let's go ahead and drop an image in here to control it. So let's find under Window, Asset Browser. Let's look through here. Presets. We have sculpting brush presets here, but I want to actually go within the texture folder within here, and we can see that there are different shapes in here that are black and white, and these can be used to control where this mesh is taking its effect. So if we wanted to, you can choose one of these shapes here to decide where we're smoothing. Let's say we want to smooth an area in this shape. We can drop this in here, and let's find a surface that I haven't smoothed too much to use this on. I can make this bigger. And for right now, I'm going to turn off the fall off. So that won't be applying the fall off on top of our texture we have here as the stamp. And I think this will just help you see the stamp a little bit better right now, but we'll go into that a little bit more. And it's referring to this fall off, by the way. I'll click here. I need to actually adjust this first. We're changing this to freehand so that this works better. And you can see that it applied the smoothing in that stamp shape. Now that might be a little bit hard to see with the smoothing effect, and it's a little bit more pronounced with something like the draw tool again, or the grab tool, but you can see that it is smoothing it out in this shape here. And you can see your stamp previewed down here. So that's what's happening. And then when you add the fall off, it'll add that fall off almost like it's on multiply. So if I decide to turn on the fall off, you can see that now it's adding this shape as a black and white value to our stamp here on multiply. So that's going to have this have a greater effect in the center and then less as it goes off to black. You can get an idea of that. You can rotate your shape that you've chosen for your stamp here. So if I increase the rotation, you can see that it's actually rotating in there. So that'll affect the angle in which the smoothing effect is being added with the stamp. You can flip the symmetry of the stamp, and then if you have this checked on, you can choose to flip it in the X direction or the Y direction when you add the stamp. So you have a couple of options there as well. It doesn't show up as much with this shape because it's pretty symmetrical. So let's find a different shape that isn't as symmetrical to flip, just so that you can see what I'm talking about in this preview here. So let's see, this leaf is not symmetrical. So let's drop this in here. We can see our leaf previewed. Now when we turn off these flip Y and flip X, you can see as I click these on and off that this is flipping our texture. So that also works. First it applies the rotation though, so that's good to keep in mind. Now the gray value, this is green when I turn on the show depth. So when this is set to 0, the brush is going to have more of an effect with the stamp on. If I were to hit undo and then set this to 1, the brush won't have as much of an effect with this on. You can turn on the show depth, but this doesn't really relate as much to this brush, but it'll show and preview a color showing the effect of the brush. So red means less effect on the brush, black is neutral, green is more effect from the brush, black is neutral. So when it says show depth, that really applies more to other tools like the draw tool, because this will actually affect the depth, because the draw tool adds more depth as it draws onto the surface. So that really applies more to that tool and the smooth brush, but that's what that is determining with the smooth brush. Is it is showing you with color in this preview down here how much this brush is affecting the area. Bilinear, it'll smooth out the pixels in the image you have if you have bilinear on to make the effect a little bit smoother. Enclose will make sure that the texture is in the center. I'm going to actually preview this with another texture that you can see it a little bit more on. Let's try these scales here. So now we have these scales that we can preview in here. If I turn off enclose, you can see that's taking up the whole circular area of our brush. If I were to turn on enclose, it shows it as a square within our brush so that you can control that shape of the brush. If you want a square brush or you want a circular brush, enclose will be your friend. Follow is really interesting. So you notice that many of these have a specific direction, like these scales, if you wanted to have the scales go in the direction tangent to your stroke as you're drawing on this, you can choose follow. It will follow the stamp texture to the tangent of the line you are drawing. So if you don't do that, the texture won't rotate depending on where you're drawing or what direction you're drawing. That really shows up more with the draw tool. So if you want to get a better understanding of that, I'd actually suggest you watch the episode on the draw brush to learn more about that. Maxon likes to give you all the options you can for all the tools. I don't think you'll need to use this very often, if at all, for the smooth brush, but it is there as an option. So I wanted to explain what it does. Stencil. So there's also the stencil option here, and you'll see it has this option, image and material. So you can also use a stencil. Now this one applies more to the smooth brush. We can use an image like before. We also have this material option, and you'll notice that's the same for the stamp. We have a material option here. I'm going to turn off the stamp so you can focus. Let me find a good surface to use the stencil on. So we have this bumpy surface on the back here, and we can use a stencil for where we smooth that. Now typically we've used an image. You can also use a material. So if I turn on the stencil and I were to use I'm going to find a shape that I think will be easier to see. Let's use this shape here again. So I'm going to use this as our image, and you can see a preview of our shape here. Now this is actually acting as our stencil for where this effect will be applied as we draw. And we'd be using the settings here as we draw just within the stencil. You can adjust the transparency of your stencil in here. You can make it visible or invisible by clicking this button here. You can hide as you draw with this. So you can see it disappears. But I'll keep that on for I'll keep that off for right now and just adjust the transparency here. You can adjust the angle of your stencil here. You can see it's turning around. You can adjust the scale so I can make this nice and small in here. And you can move it to the right or the left with this. Maybe you'll see that more if I make this a little bit less transparent. You can move it right and left your stencil. You can move it up and down with the Y here. You can see a preview of where it is on your screen in this little box. You can tile the texture along the X. You can tile it along the Y. You can flip it. Now again, this is a symmetrical shape, so you won't really see it as much here, but this would be flipping it along the X or flipping it along the Y. So it's kind of like the symmetry we saw in the stamp. And you can also adjust the gray value, and that's the same as what we've covered in the stamp. So let's actually go ahead and use this on here. I have our brush size adjusted in here, and we have our stencil turned on. I want to make sure that this cube is selected as we use it. I'm going to just smooth out along the shape of this, and when I turn this back on so that we can turn off the visibility, you can see that we actually smooth this in the shape of our stencil. So it controls where you're affecting the mesh with your tool using a stencil. It's a lot like if you were spray painting and using a stencil for that. Whatever you're applying to the surface is stenciled out. And that goes for a lot of the different brushes. As we've mentioned before, a lot of them have these similar settings. So it's just where that brush effect is being applied on the mesh while you're 3D modeling, which is pretty straightforward. Now, we haven't gone over this material option yet, and I want to explain that. I'm going to go ahead and just clear this out here so that we can choose a material and create one. Now, this doesn't work with your Redshift materials. You need to use a classic material. So I'll use the standard one. And this is just another way you can use a noise or something else within the texture to apply to the mesh. So, for example, here in our color, you can see right now it's just white. If I wanted to apply a texture, like let's say I want to apply a noise texture, we can do that. We can choose our noise from here. We have a lot of different options. And then once we do that and adjust this texture to however we'd like to, we can go back over to our smooth, and then we can drop in that texture by dragging and dropping into here, and it'll use that as a stencil, or in here you could also use it as a stamp. So you could also drag and drop this into here. So you have two different ways you could go about that. But what this will do, I'll turn on the visibility, is it'll apply the smoothing effect here using the noise texture that we added in there. And again, these textures need to be black and white values in order to be read by the computer appropriately. So that is how that works. I'm going to turn off the stencil, and I'm going to make sure the stamp is turned off, and you'll notice that the stencil effect has an option over here. If you choose link stencil, it'll apply that stencil effect across your brushes as you switch between them. Similar to how you can keep the size the same between brushes, or you can link the strength. You can also link your stencil if you find one that you like. That's an option. So we've gone through these settings here, and we've actually even already gone through our modifiers. So that pretty much covers how this tool works. It's pretty helpful and it's pretty fun. I enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed it too. I hope to see you here next time on Ambient 3D Animations. Each week we go over another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you for 3D modeling with me.